This is the second lecture for Unit 7 on learning and memory. Today we're going to discuss operant conditioning. Yesterday we discussed classical conditioning. Remember, classical conditioning is when an organism learns to associate two things together. In Pavlov's study, the dog learned that the tone meant that food was coming, and when food was coming, they were salivating. And eventually, they associated the tone and food as coming together, so they would begin to salivate to the tone. In operant conditioning, the type of learning that occurs is learning when an organism wants to gain a reward or avoid a punishment. In operant conditioning, the behavior is operating on the environment to produce either good things, rewards, or to avoid bad things, punishments. The keystone behind operant conditioning is reinforcers and punishments. A reinforcer is a stimulus that makes a behavior more likely to occur again. So you know that when you study for your psychology test, you are going to be reinforced with a better grade. So the studying is the reinforcer, and making a better grade is the reward. A punisher is a stimulus that makes a behavior less likely to occur again. So if you speed, you're going to get a speeding ticket. The ticket is the punisher. In order to avoid getting a ticket, you decide not to speed. These are the key things, the driving forces behind operant conditioning. The man who paved the way for operant conditioning is Thorndike, Edward Thorndike. He placed animals in puzzle boxes and taught them to manipulate a string or a latch. And when the animal was able to manipulate the string or latch, they were let out of these puzzle boxes and they received a reward of food. He called this learning by trial and error, the law of effect. He said that rewarded behavior is likely to occur again, and behavior that is punished is less likely to occur again. So basically what he did, as you see in the picture, he stuck cats in these boxes, and they learned to stick their paws outside of the box in order to release a latch. And when they did that, the door fell open and they received food. This idea that behavior that is rewarded will occur again is Thorndike's law of effect. And he really paved the way for B.F. Skinner, who is the father of operant conditioning. Skinner's experiments used kind of the same thing that Thorndike did. And basically what Skinner did is he took pigeons and placed them into what we call operant chambers, or we now refer to them as Skinner boxes. And what he did is he stuck these pigeons in there and he taught them to press a lever. And when the pigeon pecked the lever, the pigeon was rewarded with either food or water. Now the pigeon doesn't automatically know that as soon as they're placed in the box that they need to be pecking this lever to get a reward. So B.F. Skinner had to shape their behavior. Shaping is a procedure that happens within operant conditioning that is slowly guiding a behavior towards a reward. Let me show you an example.
Can pigeons read? This one gives every indication, because it's been taught to distinguish between two words, to behave appropriately. He's learned his different response to each sign by being rewarded with food. So the bird isn't acting independently. Its behavior is shaped by controlling its environment.
So you see, through the process of shaping, Skinner was able to get the pigeon closer and closer to the lever until the pigeon then learned that when they pecked the lever, they were going to be rewarded with food. Now, there are different types of reinforcers. There are positive reinforcers and negative reinforcers. When you think about these words, I want you to think about math class. Associate the word positive with a plus sign, and we know in math, positive signs means we're adding. And negative, think of the negative signs. In math, negative means we are subtracting. A positive reinforcer is when we add something to a behavior in order for that behavior to be reinforced. So when a dog fetches a ball, that dog is rewarded with a treat. That is a positive reinforcer. We are adding a treat to the behavior in order to get the dog to fetch a ball again. Whereas a negative reinforcer, you're removing an unpleasant something from the environment that's following a behavior. So we want to remove a headache that we have, so we take an aspirin. Or we want to remove the annoying noise that we hear in the morning when our alarm clock goes off, so we get out of bed and we turn the alarm off. It is extremely important to remember that negative reinforcers are not punishments. Taking an aspirin to relieve a headache is not a punishment. Turning off your alarm is not a punishment. A negative reinforcer is just something that is removing a stimulus from the environment in order to make sure that a behavior is going to occur again. In general, a reinforcer is any event that strengthens the behavior that it follows. So with a positive reinforcer, another example would be getting a hug or receiving a paycheck. Those are things that are being added into the environment. Whereas a negative reinforcer is fastening a seatbelt to turn off a beeping noise in your car that is alerting you that you do not have your seatbelt on. Positive reinforcers strengthen the response because the stimulus that you are getting is pleasurable. We all want a hug, we all want a paycheck. Whereas the negative reinforcer strengthens the response by removing an aversive stimulus. We want to remove the annoying beeping that we hear, so we fasten our seatbelt. Now with reinforcers, there are primary reinforcers and secondary or conditioned reinforcers. A primary reinforcer satisfies a biological need, like food or a drink. So in Skinner's study, the food that was being given is the primary reinforcer. Whereas a conditioned reinforcer is a learned reinforcer. Let's say that you have a study where a light is signaling that food is on its way. The light itself would be the conditioned reinforcer, where the food would be the primary reinforcer. You also have immediate and delayed reinforcers. An immediate reinforcer is a reinforcer that is given as soon as the behavior occurs. So for example, a rat is getting a pellet of food every time they press the bar, and that pellet of food is coming right after the bar is pressed. Whereas a delayed reinforcer is a reinforcer that is delayed in time for a certain behavior. An example of this is getting good grades. You don't get good grades until the end of the 9 weeks or till the end of the semester. Even though you've been doing what you should be doing all year long, you're not getting the reward until later on. Same thing with a paycheck. You work all week, you're not paid on a daily basis, but you know that paycheck is coming at the end of the week. That's a delayed reinforcer. Now with reinforcement schedules, you have 4 different types that are extremely important. Please make sure you know these. You've got fixed and variable ratio. Anytime you see the word ratio, you need to think that a behavior is occurring. So a fixed ratio is for every set number of times you do a certain behavior, you're going to be rewarded. An example of this would be for every 3 tricks a dog does, they get a treat. They don't get a treat after 1 trick or 2 tricks, it's every 3 tricks. That's fixed ratio. Variable ratio is random. We don't know how many times we have to do things before we get rewarded. An example of a variable ratio would be slot machines. The behavior, us pulling the bar or the handle on the slot machine, is going to eventually get us rewarded at some point. We just don't know how many times we're going to have to pull the lever to hit the jackpot. This is why slot machines are so addicting, because we never know when the reward is coming. A fixed interval and variable interval deals with time. So a fixed interval schedule is a set amount of time that passes before we can get rewarded. An example of a fixed interval schedule would be getting a paycheck every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks that passes, you get rewarded with a paycheck. Whereas variable interval, we don't know how much time has to elapse before we get rewarded. So a company that gives out random bonuses, we don't know when the bonuses are coming out. We just know that we want to do well in our company so that we could potentially get those random bonuses when they are given out. The last type of learning that occurs in operant conditioning is latent learning. Latent learning is learning that occurs but is not apparent until later on. So if you have a child who picks up on a bad word that their mother or father says, even though the child is not going to automatically repeat that bad word, they might do it at school. The parent doesn't know that they have taught their child to say that bad word until the teacher phone calls home and says, your child is cussing in class. They must have picked that up from the parent. So latent learning is learning that occurs but isn't necessarily always apparent right away. The last thing I want to talk about is punishment. Remember, punishment is the opposite of a reinforcer. A punishment is an aversive event that decreases the behavior that it follows. And just like reinforcers, we can have positive punishments and negative punishments. Think back to the math signs. Positive punishment is you're adding something. You are giving a spanking to a child that talks back. You are giving a parking ticket for speeding. Those two things are punishments, but they're positive punishments. Whereas negative punishments are when you are taking a desirable stimulus away. If you've ever been grounded, your parents are taking away your free time so that you will correct your behavior. If you've ever had your phone taken away or your car taken away, that is an example of negative punishments. And the goal of punishments is that it has to occur as soon as possible after the behavior happens. So if I write you up for having your cell phone in class, but the administrators don't give you detention or ISS for 1 or 2 months, that's not effective punishment. Punishment has to occur as soon as possible after the behavior occurs. Punishment can't be too strong, and it should be consistent with the rule that is broken. Now, real quick, because we have a few extra seconds before this timer goes off, I want to show you another video of Skinner's experiment. So you saw that he taught pigeons to read. He also taught pigeons to turn around in circles. And my favorite, he taught pigeons to play ping pong.
The two pigeons are at either end of a small ping pong table. One pigeon pecks the ball as it comes toward him and knocks it toward the other pigeon. Other pigeon pecks the ball back across the table. If it goes past one pigeon, the other pigeon can eat, and if it goes the other way, the other pigeon eats. So that it's a real game. The pigeon is reinforced for a cross-court shot if that is what gets the ball past his opponent.
So it's really pretty cool that Skinner was able to teach pigeons to do these things just based on reinforcers being given. I highly encourage you to try to both classically condition your friends, maybe even your parents and teachers, and also to operantly condition those same people. So from today's lecture, what you really need to know is the difference between reinforcers and punishments, both positive and negative reinforcers and positive and negative punishments. You need to make sure you know Thorndike's law of effect, make sure you know all about Skinner's studies, and make sure that you understand the schedules of reinforcement, the fixed and variable intervals and fixed and variable ratios.